And I will, those of you who know me, know I tend to go off on tangents quite a bit. So I'm going to try and keep it within the hour here. And my wife is not here to corral me in, so that may not work too well. So, anyways, we'll get on. We'll start some of the history of Brevard County. Frank Chapman, who was one of the people who started the Christmas bird count, he actually spent some time in the 1800s in Brevard County, and I got a chance to read some of his journals from this area. It was quite interesting to read. He stayed in the what's known as the Oak Lodge, which a lot of naturalists stayed is down in what's now Aquarina in Melbourne Beach, South Brevard County, or what's now Brevard County. And it was quite interesting to read how people did birding and science back in that time. He didn't mince his words when he wrote he said, we went out and killed this and killed that. They didn't use euphemisms at the time, and they would go out and do things like burn a marsh to get the rails to come out and collect them. But he was also quite interested in other things, mammals, and even one time he had an account. He was staying at a lodge somewhere, and he was measuring the ant lions or doodle bugs, I grew up calling them out there. So he was quite the scientist, but he did spend some time in the early days of Brevard County. 1951 was when Helen and Allan Cruikshank, which some of you may have heard of, they came to Brevard County. They had visited on their honeymoon in 1937. They visited Florida, and they decided to come back in 1951 and settle in Rockledge in Brevard County. And they were very instrumental in conservation in the county, including setting up the Merritt National Wildlife Refuge, which it was Allan Cruikshank's idea that they take the non-essential lands from the Space Center and set them aside as a wildlife refuge because there was so much good habitat out there. So it was around 1963, around the time of the establishment of the Space Center, that they set up the wildlife refuge. And then since I'm writing this history, I included myself a little bit in here. In Rockledge, not that far from where the Cruikshanks were, although I didn't know the Cruikshanks at the time, I saw my first bird. Ruby-throated hummingbird was my spark bird, if you will. I was at my aunt's house. My aunt would babysit us while my mom was at work and my dad was at work in the middle of the day. When their shifts overlapped, they would deposit us at my aunt's house, and we'd play with my cousins there. We'd run around the old house out there. And one day out in the Turk's Caps, which if you've been in Florida for as long as I have, you know what a Turk's Cap is. Popular ornamental member of the mallow family. Popular with hummingbirds because there's a nice red flower on it. And I saw a male ruby-throated hummingbird with the bright red throat going up and down and sideways and all over, doing what hummingbirds do. I don't know how I knew it was a ruby-throated hummingbird, but somehow I did. So that's one of my earliest memories, that and discovering coffee ice cream from the same aunt in the same house there. So both of those things have stuck with me for 50 years now. So and The Birds of Brevard County was a book that Allan Cruikshank published in 1982, a little bit before. This was published after his death in 77, I think it was. But he had put together most of the work for that book, and it was the first, well, I guess the only annotated checklist of Birds of Brevard County. I've got some pictures of it a little further down to show you. It's out of print, but if you get a chance to get it, it's really fun to read through. And I joined Audubon in '84. I attended my first Audubon meeting. It was quite a game changer for me to find out that there's other people that know birds and are interested in birds and go out and look at birds, and that there's a lot of birds I didn't even know about were around in the area. I did my first Christmas bird count in '84, shortly after joining the Audubon, and I saw my first scrub jay, my first Savannah sparrow, and my first black rail, along with 11 other new birds, all on that first Christmas bird count. So, and did a second Christmas bird count 2 days later. We had another 14 live birds, including Eurasian widgeon. And then later with Doug Stuckey, who refers to himself as the other DS sometimes, he led one of his famous North Brevard County trips in February of 1985, and I got to have a 100 species day, and also my first parrot, escaped parrot. We had a yellow-headed parrot out of Merritt National Wildlife Refuge. So those were some of the milestones. This is the book. I don't know how I came to have it, but this is a book about Chapman's his journals from his time in Florida, mostly in Gainesville, but he also visited Live Oak Lodge quite a bit. And he actually wrote one of the first. I love historic books, so I like to talk about them and read them and all that. And this actually has in the back of it, Chapman did a list, an annotated checklist of Alachua County based on what he had observed mostly in the fall and winter and early spring there. And so the folks who edited and wrote up this book, they actually updated it with newer information, new species have been added. So it was quite interesting to read through that. It's published by the University of Florida Press, but out of print, I'm sure, because this was printed. The other interesting thing, it was printed in like late 60s. So a lot of birds hadn't colonized Alachua County at that point, and a lot of the bird names were different. This is the book, if you can find it. It's a great little book. It was published in 82, The Birds of Brevard County by Allan Cruikshank. This is from the inside here. I picked this page because it's kind of interesting. The ringed turtle dove, which is now the African collared dove, and the ground dove is now called common ground dove. So one of the fun things about reading old books is seeing the old names of things. And the Carolina parakeet, he mentions that there were 6 shot at Paget Creek, and he said he couldn't find that on any maps. Paget Creek's actually down on Blue Cypress Lake in Indian River County. And he mentions also Chapman in here. He in his letters from Micco, probably the same book that I was referring to, he collected 15 parakeets, which were probably actually in Indian River County, but anyways, he collected those in 1889. One of the later sightings, I think Chapman had some even later than that. One of the last sightings of Carolina parakeets. So some of the interesting history. If you're a history buff and a book buff like me, these are some of the fun things I read before I go to bed at night. And so I'll go through a few of the highlight locations of birding sites. Merritt National Wildlife Refuge, I mentioned earlier, the Cruikshanks had set that up. You can see, what's now Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. It's always been Air Force Station in the past, but next to that was Kennedy Space Center. In the 60s, they came in and took a bunch of land through eminent domain. And you can see on this map, I mentioned it was a surplus land. So you can see that the out parcels in the map there, those are the facilities that the Space Center uses, and all the buffer area around that is managed primarily as a National Wildlife Refuge. And it has, I couldn't find a good representation of the checklist. They have, last time I checked, I think they had 320 species of birds have been seen altogether in this area, some of which is in Volusia County, and that includes the Canaveral National Seashore. Currently, they have flamingos hanging out there, but the northern part there, you can see the causeway coming across just near where the pin is there. That's the main public access area. The southern part of it is restricted areas for the most part. The only time you get out there is on Christmas bird counts or on special occasions, or maybe tours with the Space Center down there on the visitor center. But the northern area has Black Point Wildlife Drive, Playland Beach, the south end of Canaveral National Seashore. The best places for migration right now are going to be the hammock trails and Dummett Grove up around Sindler's Outpost up there on State Road 3. The hammock trails, the trails have changed a bit over the years. The Palm Hammock Trail used to be a big 2-mile loop. Now it's about, I think, a mile. And it doesn't go through all the same areas that it was before. The hammock is still pretty decent in migration. It used to be pretty good in winter on Christmas bird counts, but that seems to have fallen off lately. Some of that could simply be species like hermit thrushes are probably wintering further north now and not coming as far south as we don't see those like we used to. We also don't see song sparrows like we used to. back in the good old days out here. But those are some of the better areas to go birding in during fall migration in particular. Of course, Black Point Wildlife Drive is always a fantastic place to go to out there on the refuge. The Wildlife Refuge is probably one of my top favorite places to go in Brevard, in the state of Florida. And it's one of the highlights of Brevard County, which is one of the birdiest counties. Although Orange County actually can rival it pretty good, especially with Lake Apopka restoration area out there in the Wildlife Drive. And of course, Orange County happens to be right next to Brevard County too, so you can actually bird both those counties pretty easily. And go on. This area here is the Allan and Helen Cruikshank Memorial Trail. It's on the Black Point Wildlife Drive. When you stop there, there's restrooms there because back in the good old days we didn't have restrooms for decades out there. So now, thanks to Merritt Island Wildlife Association, we do have fairly decent restrooms there. I think they keep them up pretty well. This is about a 5-mile loop if you care to walk the entire thing. They don't always maintain the levee, and they have had to shut down sections at times because they've had a very aggressive female alligator nesting and it didn't take well to hikers out there. The observation tower used to be great. When I started birding these areas, it was the late 80s and into the 90s. We had a freeze in late December of 1989 that just wiped out the mangroves and knocked them down to almost nothing. And so there was a lot of very open areas on Black Point Wildlife Drive, and including the Cruikshank Trail out here and even along the roads out there. And in the probably last 5 years or so, we've really seen those mangroves finally recovering as we haven't even had a frost, I think, in this area for over a decade now, and the mangroves have really been coming back in. So you can't see quite as much. When you go to the observation tower now, you're looking at the tops of mangroves all around you. But back in the day, you used to have a big open marsh out there. And when I would go birding all day at Merritt Island Wildlife Refuge. And back when I was borrowing my dad's van, which I considered mine, but it wasn't really mine. And I would go all day and eat 2 granola dips in some water. I could actually make it a whole day on that. And I would get to Cruikshank. I had a little routine. I would go out and hit the hammock trails, and I'd go hit different areas. I'd come out to Black Point Wildlife Drive probably a little bit after lunchtime, and I would hit the tower, and you could see 10 or 12 species of ducks back then. We used to get black ducks and mallards and canvasbacks and stuff like that. And I would often have 110 or 115 species of birds by that point in the day. Now I wouldn't get much more than that. I think I only got over 120, I think twice, or maybe 3 times in all the times I was out there. But those were the days back then. I was much younger back then, and we saw different kinds of birds out there. But if you go to the tower now, you're going to be looking at mangroves and stuff like that. But so I don't get out and walk on that trail. I've only walked around it a couple of times, but it is quite a long walk. But interesting if you like doing hikes like that. So the other Cruikshank sanctuary is an area in Rockledge, which is where the Cruikshanks actually lived. It's a Brevard County Environmentally Endangered Lands program the Environmentally Endangered Lands program started in 1990. The taxpayers voted to tax themselves to raise money to buy conservation lands around the county and set them aside for preservation and management. And this piece, I remember going out on it in 1990 when FIT was looking at it, and the city of Rockledge was considering purchasing it and setting it aside as a conservation area. Eventually it became a county property, but a tremendous number of scrub jays out there. It's a great place to go and see the jays. Got some good habitat, has some pine woods out there. See wood ducks a lot out there for some reason. It's a good place. There's still quail around out there, which is a species that's declined quite a bit in much of the state. And if you want to take somebody to see a scrub jay, that's a really good place to go, because you can just walk out on the trail and they'll just come right up to you and fly all around you. So, and of course, I got to have pictures of scrub jays and other things in here because this is an Audubon thing. So this was probably, this actually might be Dee's picture, because it's awfully high quality to be one of my pictures, but you can see the banding operations here. This was, I suspect this was at, well, I don't know. I don't remember any green and silver bands at St. Sebastian Preserve, so it might have been somewhere else. Um, but it's scrub jay is an amazing bird to work with. We still have a few left over at Rock Springs Run in Orange and Lake counties over there. The Brevard County population is doing pretty well. We do a lot of work at St. Sebastian River Preserve with them, banding the young ones. And our only endemic species in Florida. We have a few endemic subspecies, but the only full species that's endemic to Florida has been seen once in southern Georgia, back when the population used to range from Fort Lauderdale all the way up to Jacksonville on the Atlantic coast, and one wandered up into, and I don't remember the exact location, but there is a record apparently in Georgia. So you can't claim all of the Florida scrub jays ever seen in Florida, but pretty much all of them. That's the whole subject for another thing, I think. But Sebastian Inlet State Park is down on, it's in Brevard and Indian River County. It is one of the premier fall migration sites. The best spot is actually over on the Indian River County side, but we can kind of claim it as part of Brevard County for discussion's sake. The campground on the south side is the best place to go during migration, both spring and fall. If you enter the state park from the south side, you go past the ranger station, go all the way across. You can park by the fish cleaning station near the entrance to the campground. They allow birders to go in through into the campsite, even though the sign says registered campers only. You can go in there as long as you're respectful of the campers. Don't go walking through people's campsites. Don't blow it for everybody. There's a lot of great patches of habitat within there. The eastern side of the campground has this just amazing wall of ficus trees that are covered in Virginia creeper. And that's something. Virginia creeper is pretty widespread in Florida, and this is the time of year when you see the berries coming out. That is something you really want to look for when you're doing fall migration, no matter where you are, Brevard County, Orange County, wherever, because when those fruits are coming out and you've got a tree just covered with Virginia creeper vines and fruits, you're going to find red-eyed vireos there pretty much, unless you're too late in the season, they've already gone through. And crested flycatchers come in, woodpeckers, warblers, all sorts of things will come in, tanagers. Everything likes to eat them. I don't know why, they taste terrible. I've tried them before, but the birds like them. So, and if you're on the coastal area or if you're in South Florida, you find a ficus, strangler fig that's in fruit. You find a strangler fig in fruit with the Virginia creeper on it, which you do see that sometimes at Sebastian Inlet. That's just, you just bring your lawn chair and sit there. All the birds are going to come to you there in that spot. And every single migrant, flycatchers become fruit catchers during migration in winter. They figured out that fruits don't fly away, so they can go grab them and eat them. And a little more sugar and less protein, but it's easy to eat. So, they do eat bugs, of course, too. But that's one of the ways that some of these fly-catching birds can winter further north, because they'll supplement their diet with berries when there's a cold snap and the bug population, the adult bug population drops. That's why tree swallows winter so much further north than the other swallows, because they can eat the myrtle berries. They switch to eating myrtle berries when there's a cold snap and they don't have a lot of insects around. And it's pretty amazing to watch those things dropping down on. They will actually, you'll see maybe 500 or 1,000 of them flying over a clump of wax myrtles, and all but a few of them will drop down, and they just gobble down as many berries as they can for about 5 or 10 seconds while the scouts fly around up ahead and watch for hawks and things like that. And then they all fly back up again. They circle around and then they come back and do it again. And I've seen it happen at St. Sebastian River Preserve State Park a bunch of times, and I'm always too much amazed to at watching it to actually take a video of it. So one of these days, I'm going to actually discipline myself enough to actually do some video of it. It's a pretty amazing thing to watch. I'm sure you can probably find it somewhere on YouTube these days. Everything's on YouTube, it seems like. So, but it is a pretty amazing thing to watch. But even the north side of the Sebastian Inlet is also actually quite good for migrants. If you come in on the north side, the tidal pool is always fun to check there. Sometimes when they dug the inlet out, the last time they dug it and actually made it stick was 1921, I believe. So it's been a little over 100 years that they managed to keep it open. The first couple of times they tried to dig an inlet through there, it just kept filling back in on them, which inlets tend to do. They do dredge it out about every 5 to 10 years to keep it open. But they created a little tidal pool on the north side of the inlet, and it can be quite interesting when the water comes in. Dolphins and manatees will sometimes come into the tidal pond. When the water's down, you see shorebirds in there, you see herons and egrets, and you also see lots and lots of people. If you come out there on the weekend, you'll be looking through a lot of people to try and see the birds in there. Good spot for reddish egret. The wooded areas around the edge of it can be quite good for migrants. And both spring and fall, if you're at Sebastian Inlet, we have these big flights. A lot of these birds are flying offshore, and you'll see flock after flock of warblers and sometimes thrushes and other stuff coming in off the ocean and coming in towards the inlet, and often passing right over if the conditions are right. If it's really rainy, they might stop in the inlet itself there. And on that north side, right around the picnic areas and the restrooms and the restaurant and all that, is a bunch of huge ficus trees, and they happen to be in fruit right now. So if you do go over there, you might see a lot of stuff in there. Sometimes you just see woodpeckers in there. You always see woodpeckers in there. And if you go to the north parking lot, there's a Townsend's warbler hanging out there. I haven't checked on whether it was seen again today or not, but there had been a Townsend's warbler hanging out. Just only the second one seen in quite a while in Florida, or Brevard County rather. They show up in Florida fairly regularly. But I think it may only be the second one in Brevard County, because Mitchell Harris, who's Mr. Brevard County these days, he hadn't seen one in the county, so he went down there and saw that. I saw the last one that hung out, spent the winter at Oak Hammock at Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge in the past. But if you even north of the north parking lot, there's some nice bits of hammock back in there. That bits of maritime hammock. There's a bike trail that goes up in there. You can see a lot of stuff along the edges in there. It's a good place to catch sparrows. I had at one time, and right around now, it was actually October 2nd, I think it was, a little bit later than now, I had a juvenile clay-colored and juvenile chipping sparrow decided they were going to mess with my head out there. They would come out one at a time from the brush into the grass, and I would convince myself, okay, it's a clay-colored sparrow. I can see that it's a clay-colored sparrow now. I'd go back in, then chipping sparrow would come out. It's like, well, now he's got a dark lure. It must be a chipping sparrow. They go in, then the clay color would come back out. And this kept going on for several minutes. And I'm just sitting there thinking, what is, am I missing something? How am I keep identifying? And then finally, both of them came out at the same time. But chipping sparrow in early October is actually pretty uncommon. Clay colored sparrow is rare but regular at that time. So that was kind of an interesting sighting, but a little bit aggravating. But that's part of birding, and it was and this was a chipping sparrow that still had juvenile plumage on it, which is something we don't see very often here in Florida either. Most of the time, by the time they get down here, they've dropped all those streaks and they look more like an adult at that point. So part of the fun of birding. But Sebastian Inlet, spring and fall migration is probably the best time to hit that area out there. The other thing is up on the north end of it, there's a huge section of hammock up there where the marina is, and And if you go back in there, there's a lot of nice maritime hammock. There's trails going out through there. They're very wet trails, and they can be very buggy at times too. So if you do hit that area, bring shoes that can get wet and be ready for bugs out there. Either have bug spray or a mosquito netting jacket or something like that in there. But it is a good spot. There's other spots in South Brevard County on the beaches as well. Maritime Hammock Preserve can be quite good and can be tremendously buggy, even worse than Sebastian Inlet, but can be quite good for birds. We've had things like white crowned pigeons have shown up in there. A lot of neat stuff. You never know in migration what's going to show up out there, but that is probably within Brevard County. Sebastian Inlet definitely ranks up there as one of my favorite birding spots, particularly for migration. It can be good in the wintertime. It's best in migration. What's next? And St. Sebastian River Preserve State Park. That's an area near and dear to me. I worked there for 12 years, I think. It's now been longer. I just realized about a year or two ago, it's been longer since I left there as an employee than when I worked there. So it's been quite a while since it's been 15 years, I think, since I actually worked there. I still volunteer there and do Christmas bird counts. We do scrub jay work and all that. But it's South Brevard and Northern Indian River County. It was set aside. You can see the big green blob, and then on the edge of it is the St. Sebastian River. And the reason that they purchased that land out there was to create a buffer along the St. Sebastian River, which is a major migratory stopover and wintering area for West Indian manatees. And so the original plan was to just protect a strip of land along the north and south prongs of the Sebastian River. But the landowners didn't want to just sell off part of their land. They either wanted to get out completely or stay in. So they expanded the project all the way out past I-95, included 5 major landowners and several other smaller landowners, and expanded out eventually to 22,000-ish acres. A lot of pine flatwoods and wetlands associated with that, a lot of scrub. It's actually a big stronghold for Florida scrub jays, primarily on the south side where most of the scrub is. There's 2 ridges that run through there. If you get into the hammocks along the river out there, they can be good for migration. Also on the north, you don't see it on this map. I didn't find a very good map, but there's a feature that runs through the north end of the preserve, and actually goes north of the preserve up towards Mako Road, the Herndon Swamp, named after the Herndons, who were a family that homesteaded on the edge of Herndon Swamp out there. That swamp connected the St. Johns River floodplain to the Indian River Lagoon via the North Prong of the Sebastian River. So a good chunk of that is preserved in the St. Sebastian River Preserve State Park. And you can get to that. You can hike up to it from the C-54 canal. And that's also another great place to go look for fall migrants out there. You have a lot of habitat there. One of the things you run into in a situation like that is there's lots of habitat and not a whole lot to concentrate the birds. That's where birding Sebastian Inlet is a little bit better for finding migrants, because they're so much more concentrated within a smaller bit of habitat there. So it's better for the birds at St. Sebastian because there's lots of habitat and lots of food. It's better for birders at Sebastian Inlet because they are so limited. We can find them a lot easier in there. So but St. Sebastian is one of the things when they expanded the footprint of it, they obviously included the scrub jays, but they also included this little guy, the red-cockaded woodpecker. This is one of the banded birds. I don't know for sure if this was actually at St. Sebastian. This might be in fact, I think this was at Three Lakes Wildlife Management Area, now that I think about it. But Three Lakes Wildlife Management Area is in Osceola County, so we won't talk about that as much for this trip. But we've actually had, I believe we had one of the birds from Three Lakes Wildlife Management Area, which is about 15 miles west of St. Sebastian River Preserve. It ended up at St. Sebastian River Preserve, but it's highly unlikely that it came straight to it because it would have had to cross a whole lot of unsuitable habitat in the St. Johns River floodplain. So we suspect it probably island hopped its way down through the Adams Ranch and some other areas in Fort Drum Conservation Area through the pine woods down there, and kind of made a U-shaped trip over to St. Sebastian Preserve. But it was kind of interesting to find a bird that was banded at 3 Lakes end up at St. Sebastian River Preserve State Park. They're an interesting bird in that they nest in live pine trees. Most of the woodpeckers do not use live pine trees because they're really hard, and they're all sappy, and it's hard to get through. And if you get through to the core wood, it's hard as a rock inside there. But red-cockaded woodpeckers have figured out how to find trees that have red heart disease, or black heart if you're a timber person. It's a fungus that gets in and rots out the heartwood. So they find those spots and they go in, they drill out the soft heartwood, and they use the live trees because they drill sap wells all around the tree and around the nest cavity, and that helps to deter predators from coming in there. And other woodpeckers, once the red-cockaded has put a cavity in, they'll come in. Red bellies will sometimes come in and kick them out. They've done a lot of really good habitat management at St. Sebastian River Preserve now, and the bluebird population has exploded out there. And now the bluebirds are starting to push the red-cockaded woodpeckers out occasionally of their cavities. Bluebirds can be nasty little things, but they've had their troubles in the past too. So over the years, bluebirds and red-cockaded woodpeckers have figured out how to live together. So I'm sure they'll do it again. But they are closely related, red-cockadeds are, to the hairy woodpeckers. They probably got isolated at some point in the southeastern U.S. and developed their own unique habits of nesting in live trees. They sound a bit like hairy woodpeckers, but they have a big white cheek patch that you can see there, and they have a ladder back. The hairy and downy woodpeckers have that white stripe down the back, and they're about the same size as hairy woodpeckers. Bill's maybe a little bit smaller than a hairy woodpecker. And they do have a red cockade, but you almost never see it. There's a couple feathers on the male up on the top of the white cheek that occasionally are flared out. I think I've literally seen it once in all the times I've been around red-cockaded woodpeckers. I've seen it in the field. And I had some photographers out at 3 Lakes one time, and they took about 800 pictures. I think they got one that showed the red cockade on it. So the only other time I've seen it is when I had a bird in the hand when we were releasing a bird. So I do have to have some pictures. Stick Marsh Critical Wildlife Area. This is what we call Stick Marsh parking lot. You can kind of see in the picture over there. You can see the parking lot down there. We used to call it, old-time locals call it Stick Marsh parking lot, because back in the day, that was the only thing out there, was the Stick Marsh. Now there's Stick Marsh, there's Fellsmere Headwaters, there's TM Goodwin Wildlife Management Area, but the islands out there highlighted in the map there have become a really vital nesting area for wading birds, particularly roseate spoonbills. It started up there. We're going on probably 12 or 13 years now. They've been nesting in there. The other species that commonly nest in there, anhingas, tricolored herons, snow egrets, and great egrets. We also occasionally get little blues and tricolors, and we've had night herons in there, and we've had glossy and white ibis in there as well. Interesting thing I found about this, the picture they used on the file, there's no birds on the island. So that's the whole point of the island. So I don't know why they use that picture for the wildlife, for the site. But anyways, if you go there in the winter time, January through mostly January through April, you'll see a lot. And of course, I did have to have a spoonbill picture here. This is one of its not a great quality picture because it's one of mine, but at least it's a spoonbill. You can see and you get them in really incredible color. When we do the trip, November 30th, we'll have the trip with the North Shore Festival out there. We may start seeing spoonbills in that early. It depends a lot on the water levels at that time, but we may well see them in there. This is a really nice flight shot, which means I think this might be one of my shots, but either mine or Dee's. But generally, if the picture is really good, it's probably one of Dee's pictures. If it's not so good, it's one of mine. But you can see a big bar on it there. And of course, this is not a great picture, but it does show one of my favorite features of the spoonbill, that golden colored tail on it there. It's pretty neat. So, and then TM Goodwin Wildlife Management Area is a really fantastic spot to go almost any time of the year. It's good for shorebird migration. A lot of that is dependent on what they're doing with the water levels, but they almost always have some areas down low and open water. But there's also it's not as well known, but it can be quite good for songbirds in migration. There's two different units you can see here. The lower unit is a lower section. There's a whole bunch of different units in there, but the lower chunk is the original unit that was purchased in 1995. You can drive up the eastern edge of it. And you can go out to the tower in the middle there. You can kind of see P1 and P2. I don't think you can drive to P4. I'm not sure why that's in there. But anyways, you can go out. The hedgerows along the edge there can actually be pretty good, especially the area between the two units. You'll see there's a little bit of a strip between the two units when you come across the north side of the original unit. That can be quite good for migrant songbirds. I often go right past it because we have such limited time available on the Broadmoor unit. You're basically allowed to hike in there or bike in there anytime, any day that it's not a hunting day, and you can check the hunting regulations. Generally, it's Tuesdays and Saturdays, and Thanksgiving weekend, but Tuesdays and Saturdays from the first week of December through about the middle of February. On those days in the mornings, you can't go out there because they don't want you getting shot. You can drive out to the original unit on Sundays between 9 and 4. You can drive out through the original unit and the Broadmoor unit on Thursdays between 9 and 4. And that's what all the parking areas are on the north side there. So I tend to, in the wintertime, you can get out the Broadmoor unit and take maybe 6 hours sometimes it takes to get through out there. This is what I do for any time of year. This is the Broadmoor unit. I mean, look back here, that this northern chunk of the Broadmoor area, that's it there. I'm from Google Earth. I start at the corner, the southeast corner there. I survey that big rectangle there on the south end is the reservoir area. That's the water that they use. They pump the water in and out of all those other units to the north and the east and the northeast there for management purposes. They cycle vegetated, non-vegetated, and wet and dry cycles in there to keep it fresh, or keep the ecosystem from going stagnant, which is what will happen if you just leave water on it constantly. Except the reservoir has water in it constantly, and it's actually still pretty good. But for those marshes out there, they manage to. So you never know from year to year where the best hot spots are going to be. You got to go out there and find where the habitat is out there. But that area across between the start and the first and second stops there, that little hedgerow, that is a great spot for migrant songbirds and wintering songbirds. And when I get out there, this last winter, I was well past 80 species every time I went out there. We got 98 one time on a special trip with Space Coast Audubon. It was very frustrating because I think we missed fish crow and mockingbird on that trip out there. But you get literally thousands of ringneck ducks out here in the wintertime. You'll get all kinds of other stuff. We've had blue geese. We've had it's kind of like a shorter version of Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive, actually. We can do it a little bit easier. Not the high volumes that you see on Lake Apopka Wildlife Drive, and perhaps a few different species out there than what you could see at the Wildlife Drive. But I do that first little stop. I look for on both sides of that levee that goes up through the reservoir there, see purple gallinules and ducks and stuff. And in the wintertime, that's where the yellow warblers seem to winter. We get them every year out there. And the second stop there, I look over to see the power lines, which are just off, I think at the edge of this map here is where the power lines are. And look for things like red-tailed hawks and red-shouldered hawks and things like that. And you drive up that eastern side, which is getting frustrating because they're letting the cattails grow up so much we can't hardly see in there anymore. But you get night herons, you get bitterns out here. We get a huge number of bobolinks coming down through this area in fall migration, and swallow migration, particularly in August and September, is pretty amazing out here. I had one amazing day. I had in the original unit years ago, in an hour and a half, I had about 12,000 bobolinks go over. They were going over in flocks of 150 to 400 birds, and it was just, and they were flying so low you could hear them. Of course, there's 400 bobolinks flying over. You can hear it pretty well. Not just the call notes, but you hear the wings beating as they're going over. So this corridor could be quite good for migration for songbirds, for shorebirds, and then later in the season for the ducks coming in. There's a couple places you can drive up when you come around the north side of the reservoir there. You can see that where 5 and 6 and 7 are up in there. It was over near 7 where the large-billed tern showed up, and I didn't bother to pull up a picture of that, but I do have some pictures and stuff out here. But we had one winter, there was about 1,000 white pelicans stayed the whole winter in that middle section on the north side of the reservoir there. And they did not run out of fish. It was amazing because usually that many pelicans will just about exhaust the fish supply and then leave. And these guys stayed all winter long. It was pretty amazing. So that's a great, we will be doing, this is basically what we're going to be doing during the Lake Apopka Festival. We're going to go out to the Broadmoor unit that day. It'll be on a Thursday, so there'll be a lot of people out there, and we're just gonna cruise around, do about a 7-mile drive out there, and depending on what the habitat's like out there, we may get 80 or 90 species. We'll have a heck of a good time out there. That'll be a little bit late for fall migration at that point, but we'll be getting a lot of the winter birds at that time too. So, and this is the ringneck duck. Not a great picture, but I like the eye on this one. The males have that amazing yellow eye on them, and ring-necked is the one that people always want to talk about. It should have been called the ring-billed duck, which I tend to agree, and hunters in fact call it the ring-billed. But it looks a lot like a scaup. It pretty much is a lot like a scaup, but it's got that little ring around the bill. You got that, the male has the black on the back, whereas scaup have more of a gray back, and scaup lack that white ring on the bill like that, and a little white at the base of the bill, and you can see that little white spur coming up between the black breasts and the kind of silvery gray side there on the male. The females can look a lot more like the lesser scaup, but lesser scaup usually have a very distinct white patch around the bill. You can see with the ringneck ducks, even if it's fairly white, it usually kind of blends in with that grayish face instead of having more of a solid brown face and solid white. And ringnecks often have that eye ring and even a little line going behind the eye. And of course, ring-necked ducks always have a ring around the bill, just like a ring-billed gull always has a ring around its bill. So, but you'll see on Thursdays when you're out there and the fishermen are running their boats out through the middle of the ducks, you might see 2 to 3 or 4,000 ringneck ducks in the air at one time out there. Oops. So I'm getting towards the end, so don't worry, we're almost out of time here. But and then this little guy, not a great picture, but it does kind of show we one of the main shorebirds that we get in the wintertime out there are long-billed dowitchers. And in fresh water in the wintertime, you're pretty much going to get long-billed dowitchers. Right now, in the migration, you might get short-billed and long-billed and stilt sandpipers and all kinds of stuff coming through out there. But I like this picture because it shows the flexible tips on the bill when they're probing down in the mud. They can kind of use the tip of their bill to grab stuff, and they're mostly tactile feeders, but they do have taste buds on the end of their bill there, so that they grab onto something, they can kind of taste it, see if it's a stick or a rock or something good to eat, like a little worm or a bug or something. So yeah, that's the end of it. So if you have any questions, these are our websites and our way to contact us. If you have questions, I love to get pictures of birds or questions about birds. I have a few people that regularly send me pictures of birds. So if you got something you don't know what it is, and Merlin's not telling you what it is, send it to me, and I probably will know what it is. I might not, and I won't make something up if I don't know. So anyways, so I will stop sharing and let you guys get back to, and we'll check the chat, see if anybody has any good questions.
Thank you, David. Very nice.
You're welcome.
Very good. Oops. Where's my check? And thanks for plugging your TM Goodwin trip on Thursday,
Yeah.
November 30th.
The festival pretty fantastic. That's one of my favorite festivals, Lake Apopka is. So I'm glad to be involved in it. I'm glad to show off one of my places on it too. Actually, the Broadmoor area is one of my favorite places to go to. So that's fantastic. So
It really works. And we're going to open registration pretty soon, maybe in a week.
yeah.
Nice.
Well, I have to mention Space Coast Birding and Wildlife Festival will be opening its registration. That's in January in Cape Canaveral area. So we're bringing that back. Some of you may have heard of it before. A lot of new birders haven't heard about it, but there's going to be a lot more information on that coming out. And that's something you can ask me about as well. I should have a link up on the website fairly soon when I get the website updated. But if you want to know about that one too, that's a pretty good one. And in fact, we even go to Lake Apopka Wildlife Management Area on that one. So. But do Lake Apopka first, because that's coming up in December. So,
all right, we did have a question.
Okay.
From possible Ethan or Brennan. What do you think is the best migrant hotspot this fall in Brevard County from a scarce warbler perspective?
That's hard to probably Sebastian Inlet. And it's actually on the Indian River side is the best spot, but even the north side is actually can be pretty good in Brevard if you want to go technically in Brevard County. I mean, Jetty Park has potential. The habitat there has some potential for fall migrants as well. It doesn't, well, unfortunately, it has a bunch of feral cats running around in there, so we don't know how long the warblers last once they get in there. But I would say probably Sebastian Inlet has really good possibility. Also, the Maritime Hammock Preserve north of there, which is in the Northern Shores area. Another spot that's becoming more popular is Indian River Lagoon Preserve State Park. It's on the road out to Honest John's Fish Camp. And that's managed by Sebastian Inlet State Park as well. But you drive in, let's look for Indian River Lagoon Preserve State Park, and you go park on the north side of the road. There's a little parking lot there. There's a bunch of old orange groves in there. There's remnants of hammock up in there. We just did a field trip out there recently. We didn't get a whole lot of stuff, but that may prove to be one of the best places. It's still relatively underbirded. Mitchell Harris and a few other people and Tom Ledford have been going in there and finding some really interesting stuff. But you know, once we really start to bird that area a lot, it's produced. I mean, it had a golden crown sparrow at one point, which is like Florida's 4th record. But I think that's going to be, if not already, that might be the best birding spot for migration, particularly fall migration in Florida. But yeah, I always want to call it Inlet Groves. So I have to kind of check myself, but it's actually officially called Indian River Lagoon Preserve State Park. So if you look that up and check that out, or let me know. I like going out there myself, actually. There's all kinds of habitat. There's old orange grove in there. There's the old canals in the orange grove. There's big ficus trees. There's remnants. There's some really nice remnants of old maritime hammock out there. There's mangrove impoundments out there, and the mangroves can actually be pretty good for migrants sometimes too. There's Australian pines off-site, which could produce stuff in there too. So it's a fairly big area, so you get the birds spread out a bit, but it's got a lot of potential in there.
Thank you. Any other questions? We have lots of thank yous, a very informative program.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Did you talk, David, about what's going on with the large-billed terns? Are they still being seen anywhere in Florida?
There's one at Eagle Lakes Park in Naples has been pretty reliable early in the morning. We don't know exactly where it's roosting, but there's a place called Eagle Lakes Community Park in Naples. It's right on Tamiami Trail. So it's actually a great birding spot. It's a great fall migration spot, in fact. There's a lot of great habitat in there. But the park officially opens at 8, but you can get in there before that. And apparently the large-billed tern down in Naples comes in about 7:15 to 7:30 or so and hangs out in the pond on the south end of the park there, and then goes off to wherever it goes after that. So if you get there early in the morning, go down in there. and set yourself up on that pond out there. You can watch it, and the laughing gulls and royal terns and other stuff come in there too. But the one that was the habitat where the one was at TM Goodwin, it gradually got wetter and wetter and more vegetated in, and so it became unsuitable for it, and it moved south quite a ways, and it settled for a short while in the stick marsh and south of the canal in another county. So I got to see it and photograph it in 2 different counties, which is kind of cool. But it was seen again in late August, and I didn't get out that day. It was on a Thursday, and I was sick that day, and unfortunately, I didn't see it. But it was seen close to where it was seen before, and that's the last sighting we've had of that bird. It is probably still around, but there's so much inaccessible marsh out there. It's probably hanging out in some spot where only the airboaters would ever see it out there. So who knows? And it might have turned around and gone back again. So basically, if you do want to see it, if you haven't seen one, the one at Eagle Lakes Community Park in Naples, early in the morning for that 15 minutes that it hangs out there, that's the time to get it there. Our East Coast bird, who knows where it is now? It's out there somewhere, I'm sure, but it's about the time for it to start heading back, though, because it's getting to be springtime for them down in the southern hemisphere. So,
and we have a thank you for everyone at Orange Audubon and to David. I am watching the presentation from El Salvador in Central America.
wow, all right.
So welcome, Benjamin.
That's where our migrants are going. A lot of them are going that way. So
you're ready.
Yeah.
I have several quick questions, if I might.
Okay.
First of all, just to preface it with an apology, David, I was looking forward to this. Unfortunately, we got tied up with some errands, so I came in late. Now I see it's been recorded.
Yes.
And I just wondered, how do I access the recording so I see, because I missed
Never a
more
question.
than the first half.
Yeah, Jim, it'll be on the Orange Audubon Society YouTube channel, just along with yours.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah,
Orange Audubon
Society,
YouTube.
and you can subscribe. We're about to hit 800
And what
subscribers.
and when do you think it'll be on there?
By tomorrow. I might do it tonight.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And the other question I had for you, David, is you mentioned Indian River Lagoon, and it's been quite a while, but I heard the water quality was really bad there. They had a lot of environmental issues. Do you know what the status is of that area right now?
It's still in flux. I mean, there's still a lot of birds around out there. It's, we're having issues with fertilizers is one of the latest things, but it's nowhere near as bad as it used to be back in the 70s and 80s when they used to draw, they would dump raw sewage out there and stuff like that. So we're still seeing, 1 million plus lesser scaup in the lagoon out there. So there's still some aspects of it that are still good there, but it's always a battle with that. But we're still having some issues with the manatees and the seagrasses and stuff like that. But I think it's hopefully it's starting to turn around a little bit. It's not quite as bad as it was. So, but like I said, we are still seeing scaup out there. We're still getting manatees at the St. Sebastian River Preserve there. So, it's not entirely doom and gloom. And there is some pushback from the public, at least, on what they want to, people want to preserve the lagoon. And then sometimes they want to preserve their green lawns at the same time, and trying to convince people that, you have a green lawn, you have a green lagoon potentially, so.
Right.
So. But, and of course, the underlying issue, the one that nobody wants to talk about, is all the septic tanks out there too that are in these older developments, and that may be an even bigger issue than the fertilizer runoff, but it's much more difficult to deal with than fertilizer too. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But if you come out to Space Coast Birding and Wildlife Festival, we'll show you around the county and other areas out there. And let's see, there's still a lot of wildlife out there. It could be better. Hopefully it will be better in the future, but
well, I am very interested in going to the Space Coast
Mhm.
birding festival. I must admit, I've been serious about birding for about 20 years.
Okay.
However, for whatever reason, I've never been to one of these festivals, and so I'm
David,
looking forward to it.
David, I'm not sure you know, this is the author of the Chapman book.
Oh, wait. Oh, really? The
Uh-huh.
book I'm talking about?
Well,
Excellent.
the,
Oh, man.
it's been my,
Weird.
and of
Yeah.
course, he was down there in Sebastian, and
Yeah. Wow.
in
Okay.
fact, if you haven't read it, David, I'll send you a copy if you'd
I've
like.
got a book. I actually found it. It's the one Frank Chapman, his journals and letters, edited
Oh
by.
yes, yes,
Yeah, I've read through it.
that's
Um, one,
that's
I
a
guess,
great source.
yeah,
Yes, a great source.
it was fantastic. Yeah, and I'll probably read through it again. Actually, as when I find a good book like that, I like to read through it again. But yeah, that was really interesting, and that's right up my alley. That's the kind of stuff I like to read, all about the history, natural history, and
Oh,
yeah.
oh, that's great. Well, I won't bother you with a lot of other questions. But I'd like to give you a call. I got your number here,
Yeah,
and
yeah, definitely. I would
we
like to.
can talk at more length
Heck yeah,
about
yeah,
the
that'd be
area of the
great.
Space Coast.
Fantastic. So,
But, anyway, thanks for doing this, and thanks to the Orange Audubon Society. Since I've spoken there, I always keep an eye on them because they have interesting gifts and
it's
a
a
great
great chapter.
newsletter.
Yeah. So,
Thank you, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
Karen Castle asked how she can send an ID picture to you, and Karen, if you got his email, just send it.
email or text, either way will work. That's the easiest way, and I can get back with you. I may have to. It didn't work. Did I put the wrong address on there? I might have. So that's simpsondavid@mac.com, mac.com is the email, and then the my text is 321-720-5516. Did I put a message? No, I did not. Yeah, I don't see anything on here, so. Or ask Deborah. She's got the correct information. So,
Yeah, Karen, if you have any trouble, email me. Let's see, Susan, can we put his number in the chat?
I can.
I think so. Oh, what is it again?
I'll just put it on here. I might have. So that's the number, and then that's the email address. So so it's in the chat there. I might have mistyped it. I didn't proofread because I didn't think I'd be dumb enough to get my own email address, my contact information wrong. So anyways, those should work. And yeah, either way, text or email. If I'm out in the field and I'm trying to identify it on my phone or whatever, I might send you a note back. So I'll have to get back to my computer and blow it up a little bit. So sometimes things are more obvious, and sometimes you get a little bad picture of a warbler or something like that. I'll have to go to the computer and blow it up some before I can tell what it is. But and I will tell you why it is too. And that's one thing that aggravates me when you go on these "what bird is this" websites. You'll just blurt out the name of the bird and don't tell you why it is what it is, which is it's not as annoying as when somebody blurts out the wrong bird and then doesn't tell you. And so then sometimes I have to go in and correct people when I see that. But anyways, but I will tell you what it is and I just got the text there. So anyways, I'll tell you what it is and why it is, and so hopefully you can learn from that, and sometimes I learn from it too. So
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and thanks again, David. That's great.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thanks
you.
Yeah, great.
I'd like to just add one last comment for David. I
Okay.
have a small bone to pick with you, David, tonight. A very small one. Yeah, you're way too modest on your photographic abilities. Those were excellent pictures in my book.
Yeah.
And I wish I could take as good a picture as you have. So don't be so modest.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. So,
All right. Good night, everybody.
Thank
all
you.
right. Good night,
Bye,
y'all.
everybody.